Before we start this investigation, we need to ask ourselves the question, what are some different ways consumers use energy? Consumers move around, eat, breathe, and digest food. Almost every activity an animal does requires energy. In a previous grade, you learned that energy is always conserved. It's not created nor destroyed, but instead, energy is transferred from one thing to another. Where do you think the energy that consumers use comes from? Well, we'll find out in this investigation when we dissect owl pellets. When owls eat, there are certain parts of their food that they cannot digest. They compress the parts they cannot digest into a pellet. Then they regurgitate, which means throw up, the pellet as waste. It might be difficult for you to directly observe an owl hunting and eating, but you can look at the owl's waste to find out what an owl eats. What kinds of things do you think you'll find? You might find the remains of small rodents or birds. You might find bones, teeth, claws, fur, and feathers. Before we start to dissect the owl pellets, we need to gather our materials. The owl pellets have been sterilized so they're clean and safe to dissect, but we will still follow safe lab practices. You'll need disposable gloves, newspaper to cover your desk, an owl pellet, a pair of forceps, and toothpicks. Once you have all of your materials, you're ready to dissect the owl pellet. With your gloves on, you can start to take apart the owl pellet slowly. Now, if you need to, you can use your knife to take some of the pieces off. The key here is to be patient, so you won't break any of the remains. Now, any pieces you find, any remains you find, clean them as much as possible and put them off to the side. Now, you can also use your forceps to take off some of the owl pellet and some of the remains that you find. And as you continue to take apart the owl pellet, the remains start to fall out. Now, this owl pellet seems to have a lot of the remains. And I'm trying to be as careful as possible, taking off little by little. The key here is to be patient. Now, I feel like I'm breaking apart a bigger piece of remain here. bones. And you can use a toothpick to scrape off some of the owl pellet. And as I'm scraping it off, I'm being careful not to break any of the remains. Now I don't know exactly what this is right here. Based on a dissection, I believe that I found the remains of a bird. Now, if I take a look here, okay, this would be the bird head and then part of the body, which is still covered by most of the owl pellet. Now, I was able to find some other bones here. Now, what gave it away was that I found this right here, which appears to be the remains of a wing, as well as the remains of a beak. Now, as I take a look at my chart, I see that I may have found some of the bird's hind limb, forelimb, as well as the bird's skull and part of the beak. You can pause the video now to draw the bird's skull, the bird forelimb, and the bird hind limb in your chart. After you're finished drawing the bird's skull, forelimb, and hind limb, you can finish the other 2 pages of the investigation.